Alright, let's get started. Hi everyone, my name is Christina Gugino and I'm an OCD Massachusetts board member. Welcome to the Les Brodberg Memorial OCD Lecture Series. Tonight, Dr. Jeff Szymanski will be discussing perfectionism. Jeff Szymanski is currently the Executive Director of the International OCD Foundation. Previously, Dr. Szymanski was the Director of Psychological Services at McLean Hospital's OCD Institute. He is the author of the Perfectionist Handbook based on his work at the OCD Institute. As a clinical instructor in psychology at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Szymanski has supervised pre-doctoral psychology interns, psychiatry residents, and has run cognitive behavioral therapy seminars. With over 60 professional presentations, Dr. Szymanski also conducts international trainings, most recently in Japan, China, and Ireland. Please join me in welcoming him here tonight.
Hello. So funny. Given more than 60 presentations, I still get anxious. Why do you guys think I get anxious giving a talk? It's not easy. Why else?
New people.
New people. Why else? People are going to judge me. I am a perfectionist. Absolutely. Right? So I wrote a book about perfectionism, but it was in large part the work I did at the OCD Institute, where I was running a perfectionism group there. So when you hang out with perfectionists an hour a week for 7 years, you learn some stuff about perfectionism. The thing I find most interesting about perfectionism is that people confuse what perfectionism is. And so I think that's part of what gets us all tangled up. So that's a large part of what I want to spend my time talking about tonight. Look at that formatting. It was so nice on the other one. So I want you to ask yourself the question before we get into this, just in your mind for a second, how do you define perfectionism? Like when you're thinking of doing something perfectly, or your perfectionism is kind of up and going, kind of take a second and think about how would you define that? And we'll talk a little bit more as we go along about why I think that's important. So here, based on the research, these are some of the better and more well-established kind of research-based ideas about what perfectionism is. So not making mistakes. I've done something perfectly if I've set a goal or standard for myself and I've met it, or I've done something perfectly if someone else set a goal for me and I met it. I wrote a paper well enough that the professor or teacher gave me an A. Order and organization is in there. Things are, if they're organized, if they're ordered, they're symmetrical, they're perfect. I'm so annoyed with this bad formatting. And it's a good exposure. Well, it's a funny thing, isn't it? So, ideals and just right experiences, they don't talk so much about this in the research on perfectionism, but I found, particularly people with OCD, are very about like that, wanting that feeling, wanting that experience, whether it's the anxiety goes away or I feel like I just hit the right note. Like I was experiencing this, I'm the worst tennis player ever, right? But if I hit the ball just right, it feels just right, and it's like nice, and I always, then I'm so impressed with myself when the ball goes over the net in just the right way, and it has a nice amount of top spin that usually when it gets hit back to me, I miss it. I'm just so enthralled with the feeling that's right. Another thing I found with people, again, more on the OCD continuum, we'll talk again about this idea of perfectionism as a personality trait versus perfectionism as a symptom of OCD, and that those are different things. So even if you don't have OCD, you're going to relate to this idea of perfectionism to a certain degree. But people with OCD are very about wanting absolutes. I want to know I'm absolutely safe, absolutely sure there's no danger, absolutely certain, and absolute mastery of a certain amount of information. And then my favorite one, it wasn't enough that someone gets a gold medal at the Olympics, they have to get the most gold medals at the Olympics that anyone has ever gotten, right? So being the best of the best isn't just about excelling. What is the most insulting thing you can call a perfectionist?
You're too perfect?
Nope. Nope.
Second best.
Average. I heard that over and over and over again from hundreds and hundreds of people with perfectionism. Do not call me average. That is incredibly insulting. I used to ask people, what drives your perfectionism? What's the intention? And a lot of times it was, I want to stand out. I want to excel. And then people would start talking about, I want to be special. And my favorite one was, I want people to put up a statue of me. People get statues put up of them, right? It's like, that's cool. But I always felt like this idea of being the best of the best, even when you achieved your goals, it's like, but I can do even more. And to just be aware of that, not wanting to be part of the cattle. You're such a perfectionist. Who in here has had someone call you that? How often did it feel like a compliment? It does. So what's funny about it, right, is, again, it goes back to this idea of this complicated definition of perfectionism and being a perfectionist, right? That there are good parts of it and bad parts of it. And I've had this conversation with people, psychologists and people that research this, and they're like, because they want to label perfectionism as a bad thing. And when I first started working with people with perfectionism, I did the same thing, because all the research were like, perfectionism, it's ideal, it's never achievable, like you need to convince people to give it up, right? So it typically is thrown at people as, you're a perfectionist, meaning you're driving me crazy, you're trying to control me, right? So usually it's kind of an insult. And a lot of the research is all perfectionism is bad. But what happens when I say to you, you're a perfectionist, and you even say, like, some of it I feel good about, and some of it, yeah, I don't feel so good about, and maybe you're even in treatment, you're like, my perfectionism is starting to get the better of me, right? So then people start to say, well, then let's make you not so much a perfectionist. And then what do you say? What do you do when people try to take your perfectionism from you? Almost inevitably, I got some version of the middle finger when I tried to take someone's perfectionism away. We do try and talk each other out of perfectionism because when we're focused on how it backfires and how it can consume us and how it can reduce our self-esteem rather than increase our self-esteem, and how we get terrorized and kind of stressed out about doing it perfectly, and we want to, oh, don't worry so much about that. Don't be so stressed out about that. Lower the bar a little bit, right? Relax. So in my attempts at first to say perfectionism is bad, you all agree with that, let's get rid of it, what I found is this defending of the perfectionism. And the conversation that we started to kind of sort out was, you know, what's wrong with, I don't want to make mistakes, I want to be certain, I want to be the best of the best. Like, that all sounds like great stuff to me. Why would I not want to be detail-oriented? Right? I have a staff that's putting together the conference that you heard about. Like if they get someone's name wrong, or they put this workshop in the wrong room at the wrong time, people can't find it. I want detail-oriented people working for me. I actually only hire perfectionists. It's a little scary. They're very organized. Why would we label a drive to excel as a perfectionist a bad thing? And then very small down there, well, yeah, I guess people do think I'm a little controlling and rigid and hard to work with. Right? So it's a funny thing what your mind does with perfectionism, that you can be having this whole conversation in your head at the same time. I see how it's not working for me, but I also see all the benefit of it. And that's where I felt like the help me with this, ooh, back off, right? Happened a lot in treating people with perfectionism. And the interesting thing is again, when I would talk with someone about who's defending their perfectionism, I would say, well, why don't you want to give it up? You keep telling me how it's destroying you. They would also say, but it's the only really important thing about me at the same time. Like if I'm ever going to do something really cool in this world, it will be because of my perfectionism, right? So when it works, and I know there's some people in the room who, again, particularly if your perfectionism is part of your OCD, you might have this experience of like, I get it, perfectionism is really ruining my life, I don't really see any of the payoffs. But most people I've worked with fall on that continuum where they get the, like, sometimes it pays off and sometimes it backfires. So you get, for many of you, you get this idea of it is really working for me, but when it's not working for me, and most perfectionists that I talk to get and notice when it's not working for them, you know, the advice is typically lower the bar. Well, to be honest, like, screw you. Like, I get all those people that are giving me the finger. Like, I run a really cool organization. I'm running that really cool organization in part because I'm a perfectionist. I want to excel. Don't tell me to lower the bar. I'm supposed to be lowering the bar at this lecture. I'm supposed to lower the bar at this organization. When I worked over at the OCD Institute, I'm supposed to lower the bar of being a psychologist, a therapist. Like, that's not good advice, but it is interesting, right? When you hear people say, stop being such a perfectionist, they're saying, don't try so hard, don't worry so much, lower the bar. That's not acceptable to me. So here's the kind of paradox that we talked about. If your intentions are good, wanting to excel, the outcomes you want seem reasonable, which in many cases they are, to feel competent and satisfied. Again, I would have this conversation with people that are perfectionists. What drives your perfectionism? And it was to feel competent, to feel satisfied, to have self-esteem, to excel, to do great things. So why are we telling people to stop being perfectionists? But, again, most perfectionists recognize the sense of when the perfectionism takes over in a certain kind of way, it backfires and it does stress you out and it does make you hard to work with or to live with or to be with, right? So I wanted people to try something with me, if you would. And this comes out of when I wrote the book. I actually didn't want to write the book. Someone approached me and said, do you want to write this book? And of course, my mind went crazy with all of my own perfectionism about people are going to know you're a terrible writer and you're not really that smart and you don't have very clear ideas and what do you really actually bring to the table, right? So my negotiation with my mind was, how about I write a book that if I read it, I would think this is kind of cool. Like, I want to feel a certain kind of way at the end of this book when I read the final draft. And then I let all the rest of it go. If I could please myself that I think it's organized, I think the ideas are clear, and I would get something out of it, then I wrote a good book, and that became my goal. So I wanted to invite you guys to take a moment and to just think about a time in your life where your perfectionism was operating, but it really did work for you. And you can close your eyes, you can just kind of look off into space a little bit, but I want you to just take a minute and to just get yourself back in your skin and to really kind of notice what it was like when your perfectionism was operating in a way that you got what you wanted and you felt pretty satisfied with it. So just take a moment to kind of get in that space. Okay. What is the experience you have just kind of being in your head, in your body, in your feelings when your perfectionism is working, for the most part, is working well? Describe that to me. What's that experience like? What did you notice? fulfilling? What does fulfilling feel like? What is it like in your body? Peaceful. Tranquility. What else?
Satisfaction.
Satisfaction.
Do you want to say that? You guys want to say that?
Pride. And again, what's the quality of your thought process? What's the quality of your just kind of sitting in your body when you're feeling pride and tranquil and peaceful and accomplished? What's that like? Some qualities that people have described before. There's an openness, there's a creativity, there's a flexibility.
Yeah, it's like the attention to detail, but then also being able to step back and
Great. So I felt like I was attending to all the pieces, but I kept the big picture. So again, this kind of shifting of perspective, right? There's a lot of movement with perfectionism when it's paying off for you, right? So I just want you to, whatever couple of words make the most sense, is just kind of tags for you, right? To just kind of think about, like, this is the kind of perfectionism, this is the kind of experience that I want to measure my current experience against, is part of what I want to talk about as we go along. Now I want to take another 30 seconds or so, and I want you to do the same thing. Just kind of close your eyes or stare off into space a little bit. I want you to think about a time where your perfectionism was really driving you, really stressing you out, and just nothing was going right. Let's just take a moment for that. Okay. What's that experience like? Describe that to me.
It's horrible.
Horrible.
It's severe anxiety. You're in a frenzy, panic.
Yep.
You want to run.
Yep.
Get your skin's crawling. No.
Yep.
It's like a
Tense.
Right.
Sweating.
Yeah.
What else? Worthlessness.
It's unachievable.
Unachievable. Yep. Right. So there's something interesting about this too, because I think when we get in our head about it has to be done perfectly, what we actually stop paying attention to is the quality of our experience. Right? And there's something about, like, okay, I can be trying to do this perfectly, or I can be trying to do something that follows a tranquil, fulfilling, peaceful path that has an open, creative quality to it. Is that what I'm doing right now? Because the funny thing about perfectionism, I find, is that, again, it's on a continuum. And you can take anything and be more perfectionistic about it or less perfectionistic or healthy about it or unhealthy about it. And there's something very helpful whenever I got caught up in people are going to think the book sucks, that I was back to, am I following my principle of, will I enjoy reading this book myself? And that always brought me back to this place of creativity. It wasn't about lower the bar. There's nothing in there about don't work hard. There's nothing in there about don't try hard. It wasn't about don't bring your best. It was about bringing a quality of experience that was different, right? So there is now in the research more of this idea of healthy perfectionism and unhealthy perfectionism. There's a lot of debate about this. And again, they were all saying, look, if it's backfiring, we're going to call it perfectionism. And if it's not backfiring, we're going to call it conscientiousness. The problem is I was like, well, you're researchers. And this is not how the average person thinks. The average person bundles all their perfectionism up at the same time, right? And so what I found was helpful is, when is my perfectionism working? What is contributing to that, right? And how do I get on that side of the perfectionism? Because I'm not going to give it up. So how do I identify when the unhealthy is operating, and how do I shift myself over to the healthy side? So in general, unhealthy perfectionism is operating when failure, so your mind is throwing out all of this stuff about, you're going to fail, this is going to be terrible, people are going to judge you. What's interesting, they've done some cool studies with athletes, and they did this cool questionnaire, and they were looking at how preoccupied were they with failure, and how preoccupied were they with doing their best at achieving their own personal standards. And the athletes that performed the best were the ones who focused on, what do I need to do well? And they had trained themselves that whenever I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to fail, they just noticed that and just didn't get caught up in it, right? They didn't try and push it away so much, but they're like, we all are worried about failure. I'm not going to get caught up in my mind about failure. I'm going to refocus my attention on, what do I need to do well? Right? So when we're preoccupied with failure, we're in the unhealthy end of things. We're concerned about making mistakes, we're on the unhealthy end of things. When we're focused on, what do I need to do to please another person? You know, the funny thing about this too is that, you know, I found when I went, because I was in graduate school for 463,000 years, right? So, and what was funny, that what I learned towards the end is I could write a paper that will please this professor and I can get a certain kind of grade. Or I can write a paper that actually, I'm going to research this, I'm going to look into this, I'm going to think about this. Same thing, like I'm going to write this for me, and I'll be interested in what they have to say, and yes, their grades are going to affect me and so on. But I found when I focused more on, I'm going to learn this for me, and I'm going to kind of conceptualize this in a way that makes me feel like I got somewhere with it, like, great, that turned out to be my standard. And more often than not, when I focused on pleasing me, I actually got more approval, as funny as that is. And then there are times where if it doesn't match up, it doesn't match up, right? And then you have a choice, right? Do I want to be driven by what other people think of me, or do I want to be driven by what I think of me? Which is very hard, and again, much easier said than done. But again, there is a choice in all of that. The other part of an unhealthy, when you're in unhealthy perfectionism land, is you need to look at what goals you're setting for yourself and how often you're pretty close to achieving those goals. And what I mean by that is that, so when I would talk with people about something as simple as like, what's something you want to change about what you're doing this week? I want to exercise more. Okay, well then let's set up an exercise program. Okay, well what do you like to do for exercise? Well, I like to run. Okay, well when was the last time you ran? 10 years ago. Oh, all right. So, well, how much would you like to run this week? I'll run 6 days and I'll run 8 miles a day. Okay. That's the kind of goal setting that perfectionists engage in when unhealthy perfectionism is operating, right? This does not mean you don't do goal setting as a healthy perfectionist. You absolutely need to do goal setting. And in fact, one of the best indicators of being in healthy perfectionism is that you've identified a standard that you've set for yourself and that you are tracking. I'm setting a goal and I'm more often than not getting pretty close to the goal, with the idea of I can set this goal and then I can raise it later if I want to continue to shape myself in the direction of higher performance. That's perfectly fine. One of the best indicators of being in healthy perfectionism is that you're setting personal standards that you're getting pretty close to. And again, you can vary them over time. It is not about lower the bar. Oh, it's brutal. No part of that is formatted correctly. All right, so unhealthy to healthy on the top. So I just want you guys again to think about how perfectionism moves from a personality trait into OCD. And in some ways, on the left end, we have OCPD. So on the unhealthy end, we have diagnostics. We have OCD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and OCD. In OCD, we have a lot of rigidity. We have this pervasive sense of perfectionism, that it kind of moves throughout your entire personality. Everything has to be perfect. And people with obsessive compulsive personality disorder typically do feel ineffective or get feedback from others that they're ineffective. When you have OCD, you get stuck in just right, you get stuck in symmetry and order, and most people report like feeling paralyzed and procrastinating, like I just can't move because if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it at all. Then we have on the personality trait, and we have more of the self-doubting, where you hide, you're preoccupied with making mistakes. Again, you do a lot of procrastination. And then on the healthy end, where we're in personality traits, we have ambitious. Sets high goals, conscientious, learns from mistakes. I'm going to let go of my unhealthy perfectionism that is telling me that is such a disaster that no one can follow it. You guys get the basic idea, right? So to be thinking about, instead of, my perfectionism is terrible, but I can't live without it, begin thinking about this, I move more on one end of the continuum, and I can move more on the other end of the continuum. And in fact, any strategy that you use, goal setting is a great example of, you can use it in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. The unhealthy is there's this huge gap between what your goal is and what your performance is, and the healthy is I set goals and I achieve them. I really need to check my slides when they transfer to the computer. This is a what I typically encourage people to do, if you want to work on your perfectionism, again, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater because no one wants to do it, this is a self-assessment that I put together. It's on these slides, but actually it's on my website. So if you just want to go and take the test, it's on Dr. Szymanski, drjeffszymanski.com. You can just go on there and take the test yourself. But I just wanted to put it up here because I wanted to underscore this idea that there are some parts of your perfectionism that are fine. And there's some parts of your perfectionism that are working against you. And no two perfectionists that I ever worked with have the same profile. Like, this is your own perfectionism profile. So the dimensions are, again, do my goals and outcomes match? Do I feel like I'm flexible and adaptable? Do I devote my time and energy to my strengths? I'm good at prioritizing. I'm good at meeting deadlines. My concerns about making mistakes pay off, right? So again, I have a problem, and I will get into trouble with some behavior therapists over at the OCD Institute, if people are here and have ETs over there, that as perfectionists tell you to purposely make mistakes. I'm not a fan of purposely making mistakes. We all make hundreds of mistakes every day, so why would we purposely need to make a mistake? I think the issue is, once you make a mistake, how are you responding to it? Don't go out of your way to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. How are you responding to the mistake? If you're trying to hide it, trying to cover it up, trying to fix it, that's a different issue. But you don't need to go out of your way to make mistakes. And what are you learning from it? Are you beating yourself up about it, or are you saying, there's information in here? Right? There's this really cool literature on what they call deliberate practice. Like, so I don't do this when I play tennis. I go out and I play tennis and I hit the ball the same way all the time. And so for 15 years, every summer, I go and just play poorly. I've really never gotten much better than I was 15 years ago, because I've never taken lessons. And I just want to go out and run around and be in the sun and hang out with a friend of mine. So I don't really care how good I play tennis. But what's interesting is that people with perfectionism, when they're in their unhealthy end of it, they think more is better. Just do more. Just practice more. Just do more. Well, if you do more of the same thing, you aren't going to get any better. So this idea of deliberate practice is that when you make a mistake, you go, oh, what was the mistake here? What do I need to learn from this? And how can I implement and do something different next time? So you're in healthy perfectionism mode when you have flexibility and adaptability, right? I made a mistake, and instead of getting lost in you made a mistake, and I need to work harder and try harder, it's no, I need to work differently, and I need to try differently, right? And it doesn't even matter if you make another mistake, as long as you don't make the same mistake, right? That ends up being kind of your rule of thumb. Who cares about mistakes? If you're making different kinds of mistakes, you're probably going to be on a better path. A positive attitude, I recognize my strengths and weaknesses, positive attitude towards upcoming projects, focuses on success, not failure, balanced in self-evaluations, comfortable with making mistakes, problem solving versus self-criticism. So one thing about self-criticism, perfectionists love engaging in self-criticism. Our minds are built to be self-criticizers. So, and then we indulge that habit of our mind. The problem with self-criticism is like any punishment. So think about what punishment does. What's the function of punishment? If you're going to punish someone, what is the purpose of punishing them?
Try to keep them from doing the same thing again.
Don't do that, right? When you say to yourself, you're so stupid, don't do that again, you engage in self-punishment, what are you actually not doing when you engage in self-punishment or you punish someone else?
You're not focusing on what you should do or what you really want to do.
Exactly. The problem with punishment is it is just a vengeful act. You did, it doesn't matter who the you is, you did something bad, I'm going to make you feel bad for doing that, don't do that again. And nowhere in there is any information about how to not do that again and what to do different. So again, it goes back to this mistake making. Who likes making mistakes? I don't like making mistakes. I've already made 37 mistakes in this presentation, whatever, right? Going out to dinner with Lisa afterwards, she's going to tell me all the mistakes that I made. In part because I'm going to solicit them, right? I'm going to say what went well, what didn't go well. So she better be taking notes, right? Because I want to give a better presentation next time, right? So the idea is when we get lost in the punishment, we don't spend any time in the problem solving. Collaborative, constructive criticism, ask help for others when needed, driven by my own goals, not to please others. Again, looking at your own profile. Now, when I've had people do this, what they find is, oh wow, actually there's a number of things I'm doing well, right? So the bottom line is don't get rid of your perfectionism. That's not the goal. So how do you move from the unhealthy end of the continuum to the healthy end? So I want to talk about 3 strategies. I want you guys to think a little bit about this intention versus strategy when you think about your perfectionism. And I alluded to this earlier. For you guys, what is the intention of your perfectionism? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Throw some things out there.
Be the best.
Be the best.
Feel certain.
Feel certain.
Feel proud.
Feel proud. Get things that are valuable to you. Feel confident. So when someone says you're being such a perfectionist, they're actually not attacking your intention. But that is, it's a very interesting thing, right? When someone starts to challenge your perfectionism, but I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to do a good job. I'm trying to do good by myself, for myself, and for other people, right? So when you and other people are challenging your perfectionism, don't challenge your intention. That's not the problem. The problem is your strategy. You know you're in unhealthy perfectionism land when your strategy stays the same. And for those of you that your perfectionism is part of your OCD, you can define that as a ritual or compulsion. I am going to try and solve this problem of not being perfect the same way over and over and over again. So the problem is in your strategy. So when you're thinking about altering your perfectionism, don't worry about your intention. Your intention's fine. In fact, I would invite you to spend more time thinking about your intention, right? So one of the things, so Lisa's a trainer in acceptance and commitment therapy. Some of you guys that are over at the OCD Institute are exposed to some of this through other people who work there. And one of the components of acceptance and commitment therapy is that one of the things that intuitively for all of us drives our behavior is I want to feel good and I don't want to feel bad. And that's how I'm going to make decisions. And from an acceptance and commitment therapy point of view, they kind of look at it as, look, we're all made up of good feelings and bad feelings. And when we actually try and suppress bad feelings that we're having, most people's experience is that that doesn't work. So then you go and find someone who is an expert at making bad feelings go away, but those people aren't any better at making bad feelings go away, which kind of sounds like, well then what the hell am I supposed to do? Feel bad all the time? Kind of yes. And while you're feeling bad, go and have a kick-ass life, right? If I listen to my anxiety, I've given 80 presentations. I've given them in China and Japan, and I'm here giving a talk to you guys, and I'm still anxious. So I'm supposed to sit there and not get up. If I listen to my feelings, if I listen to my anxiety, I don't have an interesting life, because what does my anxiety tell me to do? What does your anxiety tell you to do? Avoid, protect, withdraw, move away. If you start to organize your life less about, I need to make this go away and I need to make this happen, and you say instead, what is important to me? And the exercise I used at the Institute is literally write your eulogy. What do you want people to say when you're dead? What do you want your life to have stood for? And to really spend some time with, what are my intentions? Like, why do I want to be confident? Why do I want to be a standout? Why? In the service of what? What is valuable? What is important? What matters to you? And I would argue that when you did that exercise earlier of your healthy perfectionism was operating, you were actually in touch with something valuable. You were in touch with your values. You were in touch with something that mattered and was important to you. And when you're in unhealthy land, you were noticing maybe what was valuable to you, but you were forgetting why it was valuable to you, right? Like, if I'm going to spend time with my kids, I have to spend time, and it has to be quality time. That doesn't sound like quality time. That doesn't sound like the recipe for quality time, right? So if you're caught up in I have to, you described it very well, like it's this panicked, like pushed, forced, you're not in values land anymore, right? You're in, it's in the service of make bad go away and make good show up. But I'm terrible at that. I don't know anyone who's terribly great at that. I do know a lot of people that take all their good and bad and just move forward towards things that matter. Right? The Viktor Frankl sitting in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany. I can do any how if you tell me the why. So pay attention to those intentions. Pay attention to what matters when your perfectionism has creeped up on you. So when I used to give perfectionism talks, I used to spend a lot of time finding things and talking about things. And what I'm recognizing now is that one of the critical decision makers in thinking about perfectionism is this, again, this quality of experience. Like, how do I get to that sense of, like, I'm feeling creative, I'm feeling open, I'm feeling stretched, I'm feeling kind of in this moment. It's not a rigid, forced, panicked feel. And so I talk about the difference between persistence and perseveration. So persistence is the ability to continue engaging in a behavior activity to reach a goal even when the task is difficult or takes a long time. So usually when I'm talking with someone about perfectionism, they say, well, so I'm supposed to give up, so I'm not supposed to bother. Well, sometimes yes and sometimes no. How you are engaging in the task. Like I said, I was in graduate school for 463,000 years. It wasn't fun. I was poor. They paid me no money. Right? They constantly told me everything I was doing wrong. It wasn't fun. I think I was clinically regressed towards the end of graduate school. So persistence is you stay connected in the way that I was just talking about. You stay connected to a valued direction, even if it's hard. Again, think about your quality of experience and what does that feel like. That's different than perseveration. So perseveration is continuing to use a particular strategy even when it's not paying off anymore. Insisting that every step is completed perfectly before moving to the next one. If something isn't work, they try to make it work. It's again that I have to do it this way. Rather than I have good intentions, this isn't the way to get there. I'm not translating my intention the right way. And someone described it earlier, this perspective taking of you're persistent when you're detail-oriented, but you remember why. You're perseverating when you're only focused on details. You lose sight of the function, you lose sight of the purpose, you lose sight of why it matters. When you're in that place, you're perseverating. So the other thing, the third kind of take-home point I'm hoping people take away from this talk is everything's not equally important. So my best example goes back to the tennis example. A friend of mine, he was so good this weekend, so it's bad to throw him under the bus, but so when we historically played tennis, he's an architect, he's like a middle-aged architect, and we play tennis once a week just in the summer. Like we don't even bother to go and play indoor tennis, and neither of us have ever had a lesson, so we're horrible. So, but he's like, he'll watch the US Open, and I can always tell when he's watched tennis on TV. So he'll watch the US Open, he'll come on, he'll start trying to hit balls like professionals do. And of course nothing's going anywhere except in the net and over the fence. So he'll get increasingly frustrated. And then the worst part is like when the 16-year-old kids get in the court next to you, and they're like just hitting gorgeous like balls with amazing topspin, and they're going back and forth for like 15, and he'll start watching them, and he'll try and hit like them, and then it goes into the net, and at one point like he'll scream, he'll swear, he throws his racket down, and like stomps away, and I'm like mortified and embarrassed, and I've threatened like a million times to never play tennis with him. But part of what's he's getting caught in is because I want to do this well, I ought to do it well. Because this came across my desk, I have to do it perfectly. And again, it's like the world and coincidence and circumstance is telling you that everything you touch has to be done the right way. And that is the recipe for unhealthy perfectionism that backfires. Now the good news is, again, I don't tell people to lower the bar except when it's in the service of bringing your A game someplace else. You guys all know this. You can't do everything well, you just get exhausted. So then what do? If everything can't be done perfectly? If you're a middle-aged architect and you play tennis a dozen times a year and you want to play better, right? So it's back to what are your values? What are the important things? And there was this cool book I read called The Courage to Be. And the basic idea, it was 200 pages just about the concept of courage. But basically what he said is, pick 10 things you want to do in your life. And now, for items 4 through 10, cross them off. Give them up. Don't devalue them. Like, notice the pain of agreeing that you're going to give up on them. And the reason you're going to give up on them is because true courage involves sacrifice. Just because you want to do things well doesn't mean you should try to do all things well. Pick the things that are the most important to you and do them very, very well. And don't get distracted by the bullshit in the world. I swear a lot. Isn't that terrible? Don't get distracted by less important things in the world, right? But our minds do that, right? When you're a perfectionist like me, I'm like, I want to do everything well. I don't like looking awkward. I don't like making mistakes, right? But if I get consumed by that, I can't bring my A game to the things that are most important. So it is a great exercise to sit down and say, what matters to me? And what seems like it matters to me, but is actually energy that I can take and redistribute. So I'll talk a little bit about this ABC task in a second. And then we talked a little bit about sacrifice. So an exercise, and I would encourage you to when you go home tonight, to even think about doing something like this. And when I did this in the perfectionism groups that I ran, people found it actually quite challenging, is to pick 2 or 3 tasks in your life where when you kind of thought about what is valuable and important to you, what do you want to bring your 100% to? What do you want to bring your A game to? And that is the place where I would say don't lower the bar. Like, just throw yourself at those things, with the understanding that not everything is going to be in your A category. So it's in school, it's like, I'll get an A in math, right? I actually did this in high school. Some part of me was reasonably paying attention in high school. At some point in high school, I decided I wanted to be a psychologist, and I was like an AP math, and I was like an AP science, and I was like, I don't need to be an AP math and AP science. So by my senior year, I was like, this is my senior year. So I dropped down to like the regular math and the regular science. I was like, I'm going to have fun this year, and then when I go off to school, like, I'm going to commit to learning more about psychology and etc. It was one of the only smart things I think I did in my adolescence. But it really was, like, I was choosing to devote myself to where I wanted my A's, being willing to get some B's. So what in your life is important, is valuable, but 80%, you really just need a B. It'd be nice if you had an A, but when you sit down and kind of do this introspection, like, everyone can connect with that idea of course, we can't do everything 100%, right? I don't need to underscore that that's unhealthy perfectionism. You guys all know that's unattainable, we all get that. But it's like, well, what do I do? Well, if I know I'm just bringing my B game here, it is because I'm bringing 100% to these tasks. And I think that ends up feeling more palatable. Then it's a strategic lowering the bar. And then there are some things where someone, your mind, your parents, society has told you is really, really important and you think is supposed to be in the A category, and when you take a step back, you're like, I just need to get by. Like, no one's looking at my sock drawer. Although in my sock drawer, it is pretty organized too. But I like my sock drawer organized, but that's for me. So what can you bring 50%? Be on autopilot. Like, do you really need to proofread all of your emails and make sure there's capitalization, right? Again, the idea is I am devoting 50% to these lesser important things because I want to keep my reserves for my more important things available. And then are there things that are operating in your life that you're really like, I actually really don't care about that? Like, finally, I think my friend figured out that tennis did not need to be at the top of his list. So we actually went out and had fun and played pretty well, and he didn't get cranky once. Maybe he's growing up. So I wanted to make sure that there were time for questions. So just to kind of summarize what I was hoping to get across is perfectionism is on a continuum, to think about the healthy aspects, the unhealthy, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which no one wants to do. To consider doing a profile, like, what do I do well? What is on the healthy end for me? What's on the unhealthy end for me on average? Because then, again, it's the same thing. It's like, well, then I don't need to worry about this stuff over here. This stuff over here is good. It actually builds a little bit of confidence. And then this is the stuff over here that I need to worry about. Get very connected to your intention, and remember that you and other people really, you don't need to question your intention, and other people, if they're challenging your perfectionism, aren't actually questioning your intention. They're questioning your strategy. And if you want to move from the unhealthy end of the continuum to the healthy end, it's about varying the strategy. Learn to recognize when that quality of experience of I'm working hard, but I'm spinning my wheels is perseveration versus I'm working hard and I have that kind of movement and that flow and that flexibility and that creativity that's going on. The feel of healthy perfectionism as I've been kind of thinking about it, and kind of then the last point we just talked about is prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. So I thought I would leave the last 10 or so minutes for questions. And then I'll change the book.
Okay. So I have a question in terms of values and goals.
Yes.
Because I know it's very important to separate the two, and that values help you decide, like, how to go about, how to achieve your goals in a way, like whether. Okay. Well, see, the thing, like in society right now, the goal of being successful, doing well in school, all that, is very tied into the values of like being healthy in your later years and like being, essentially the formula is if you're successful, you will be happy. So I think it gets really confusing. So how,
what do you think?
well,
Take society out of it. What do you think is a successful, healthy life? How would you define that?
I mean, I would define that by, I guess, friends and family, and
Why's that?
I think because they bring the most happiness.
So what do you make of that?
Yeah, that is grounding.
What just happened? What did you notice just happened internally?
Like physically or?
Anything.
Well, I was happy to hear that because, I mean, I think I felt more content, definitely.
It was interesting, even as you talk, I don't know if anyone else kind of heard this, even in her tone of voice. She went from this, like, I have to, and people are making me, and I don't really want to, but I know I should. And then as I asked her some questions about, like, connect to what matters, like, you just kind of find that, like, oh, that's where I'm supposed to be, right? That, oh, that's where I'm supposed to be, that is the core of healthy perfectionism. Because then from that, everything else, your intentions, your values, the goals, the strategies, they all kind of start to come together in this kind of funny way. So I encourage people to find that place in themselves because I think that's your guide, your guiding principle. And that's the difference between I have to write a book that is going to matter versus I have to write a book that's going to please me because I'm kind of a hard audience anyway. And when I found that place, it was like that, like that very gut, like that makes sense on all kinds of like body level, spiritual level, cognitive level, emotional, physical level, like it all just fits. People know what I'm talking about that feeling? Like that's the feeling that you want to cultivate and get as the driving force behind your perfectionism. Other questions?
One thing I noticed, if you're a perfectionist, I think you expect that from people you work with, and that's been I had that turned around on me by someone I work with. That she is like she's got her own issues. I know, but it's like I've said, you know, never. It's not that important. Who cares? And it was like I said, am I like this? But I mean, like that's one thing I've noticed that you know, it makes people nervous because, you know, if everything's going to be just right. What about people that look at it like, yeah, I make, you know, it's not big, I'm not landing airplanes. You know, I mean, yeah. It's not, or it's like, so what? I can, you know, I can make a mistake and not drink over it, or,
right?
You know, I can, you know, instead of someone that is a perfect, but maybe that it's you know, it's smooth in my head.
Right.
But other people, it's not a big deal.
Well, it's interesting. It's two things, and I think they're both related to perspective, right? The perspective of what does this mistake really mean? How important is this outcome for this particular project? So the perspective of like what is the desired outcome? And I think the other thing that happens, again, because I hire only perfectionists at my foundation, I don't know why, they just all turn out that way, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, another one of them, is perspective taking about what would it be like if I were on the other end of my behavior. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you get really kind of snippy and critical, like if someone were treating me that way, like that doesn't feel very good. So the goal has to be, how can we, what I encourage my employees to do is, the goal is to do the best project we can with the best outcome, still liking each other at the end of it. And if we start to bark at each other, It's a taking a step back and saying, we're not looking very collaborative, we're starting to criticize each other, what's that about? And more often than not, what comes out of that is, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, I like things on email, I prefer you call me. I would rather, I like to edit a lot up front. I like not editing a lot up front. And then you start to learn different styles and different ways of working. And the people have different habits. Some people don't like, I had one person say, give me things in 2 sentences and then I need to kind of digest it and respond to it. Some people are like, no, I want you to kind of give me the whole paragraph, all of your thinking about it, right? So that interpersonal dimension of perfectionism, I think, is super important to pay attention to, because you can lose sight of the relationship because you're trying to get the best product. And as you mentioned, sometimes for many of us, what makes the world go round is our connection to people.
Can I ask one? Along with your book, When Perfect Isn't Good Enough by Anthony, I forget his last name.
I know the one you're talking
Is that, I think it was written in '98. Is it still, up to date? Do you know?
So when I wrote my book, I read some of the ones that were out there, and they all came from, I'm a CBT trained person, I worked at the Institute. Again, I used some of those books when I first started writing the perfectionism book, and I felt like I kept running into the same problem, which is, I think the message in those books sometimes is, knock it off, it's a bad thing, lower the bar. And I didn't want that to be the message in my book.
What if it's not like you're saying, you hire perfectionists to work with them? What if it's just everything you put on yourself and you're perfectly fine with your coworkers slacking off, like you make excuses for them or whatever, and you're okay with that, or your kids, you just let them, oh, do your best, whatever, but you do it to yourself. How is that?
Well, what do you make of that? What's the problem for you with that?
It's pretty screwed up.
Well, why is it screwed up? Determined by who?
I think it's, like you said, you're punishing yourself because you think you have to do it a certain way to make, just right, so nothing bad will happen, but for some reason, you think that's all you're doing, even though you're not it's all done. You think that they can't possibly save anyone because they don't have to do this. This is something you have to do.
So let me ask you this. So you try to do things perfectly, you try to pick up the slack of other people, and you are repeatedly doing that over and over and over again. So I would term that what? Using the same strategy over and over again. Perseveration. What's the antidote to perseveration?
Set a goal and change your way of doing things. Don't do it the same way.
Change your strategy. So the only thing I would say to you is try one thing different and just see what happens. I wouldn't even recommend what that one thing is. I think it might occur to you. But just do one thing different. What would happen? And you just see.
The world would go to hell. It's easy. Said the world would go to hell. No.
It may.
That's the feeling, but no.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then it becomes, and this is what I found so helpful about ACT, and then we need to end, is do I want to be driven by my emotions that fluctuate and tell me the truth and lie? Or do I want to be driven by values? I want to be a valuable coworker. I want to feel competent. I don't want to feel disrespected. I want to feel heard and seen and listened to. Right? Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.